A soldier returns home from war, haunted by faces he couldn't save. One quiet night, in a lonely park, he hears a child crying and finds a little girl, abandoned, freezing, and clutching nothing but a worn-out teddy bear. He thought his days of rescue were over, until she looked up at him and whispered one word that changed everything. At first, it seemed like a simple act of kindness, but when the system tried to tear them apart, something extraordinary happened. His old squadron reunited, not for battle, but to fight for one small, forgotten child. As a brotherhood of soldiers becomes the family she never had, the question isn't how they saved her. It's how she saved them. When love, loss, and loyalty collide, how far will one soldier go to keep his promise? To a little girl who reminded him what home really means? The bus doors hissed open, and Captain Michael Walker stepped down onto cracked asphalt. The autumn air hit him first, cool and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. It felt wrong. 12 years of desert heat had rewired something in him, made this Tennessee morning feel like someone else's memory. He adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder and tucked the folded flag tighter under his arm. The parking lot stretched empty before him, painted lines faded to ghosts. No one waited. He'd told them not to come, but some stubborn part of him had hoped anyway. The bus pulled away with a grinding roar, leaving only silence. Michael stood there a moment longer, boots planted on familiar ground that felt foreign now. The hardware store across the street had a new sign. The diner looked smaller than he remembered. Everything had kept moving without him. He started walking. The key still worked, though it stuck in the lock. Michael had to lean his shoulder against the door before it gave way, with a groan of protest. Inside, dust motes swirled in the weak sunlight, filtering through yellowed curtains. The house smelled like time, musty and closed off, like a held breath. His parents' furniture sat exactly where they'd left it 3 years ago. The photographs on the mantel stared at him. Dad in his Sunday best, Mom in her garden, Michael himself in his high school graduation gown. That boy looked so young, so sure of himself. Michael set his duffel down and walked through rooms that felt too quiet. The refrigerator hummed to life when he plugged it in, breaking the stillness. He opened windows to let fresh air chase out the staleness, but it couldn't chase out the emptiness. A knock at the door came mid-afternoon. Mrs. Henderson from next door stood on the porch with a casserole dish wrapped in foil. Her smile was warm but careful, the kind people gave to broken things. "Welcome home, Michael. We're so proud of you. Thank you for your service." "Thank you, ma'am." The words came automatically, hollow in his mouth. "If you need anything at all, I appreciate it." She handed him the casserole and patted his arm gently before leaving. Michael watched her go, then set the dish on the kitchen counter beside 2 others that had appeared while he was unpacking. Tuna noodle, chicken and rice, lasagna, still warm. His hometown had always been good at this, feeding grief with covered dishes, as if enough green bean casserole could fill the spaces people left behind. More neighbors came as the day wore on. Mr. Garrett from the hardware store, the Phelps family from down the street. Each one thanked him for his service, their eyes sliding away from his too quickly, uncomfortable with whatever they saw there. By evening, Michael stood in his parents' kitchen, his kitchen now, surrounded by enough food to last weeks, and feeling hungrier than he'd ever been. He heated up the lasagna because it seemed rude not to. Ate it standing at the counter, barely tasting it, washed the fork, put it away. The house settled around him with creaks and sighs. Night fell heavy and complete. Michael lay in his childhood bed, staring at ceiling shadows he'd once known by heart. The cicadas started up outside, their song rising and falling in waves. In the desert, there had been different sounds: wind against canvas, distant generators, the shuffle of boots on sand. And children's voices. Always the children's voices. He closed his eyes and saw them anyway. The little girl in the blue dress who'd given him a drawing. The boy who'd taught him 3 words in Pashto. The siblings huddled together in a doorway, watching his convoy pass with eyes too old for their faces, the ones he couldn't reach in time. Michael's hands clenched in the sheets. His therapist at the VA had told him the memories would fade, that he needed to give himself grace, that he'd done everything he could, but everything hadn't been enough. The cicadas grew louder, insistent, filling his head until he couldn't stand the noise and the stillness and the useless spiral of his thoughts. He threw off the covers and dressed in the dark. Jeans, old sweatshirt, boots. The front door closed behind him with a soft click. Outside, the streetlights cast pools of amber glow along the empty sidewalk. The night air bit at his face, sharp with the promise of winter coming. Michael shoved his hands in his pockets and started walking. No destination in mind, just the need to move. His feet carried him toward the park without deciding to go there. It had always been his refuge as a kid, the place he'd gone to think, to hide, to pretend the world was bigger than this small town. The swings stood motionless in the dark. The slides gleamed dull silver. Michael walked deeper into the park, following the path by memory and streetlight, searching for something he couldn't name. Peace, maybe. Or just a few hours without the weight of all those small faces pressing against his chest. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow that made Michael's eyes hurt. He sat in a plastic chair that was bolted to the floor, his back straight out of habit, while Grace pressed herself against his side. She hadn't let go of his hand since they'd arrived. Officers moved past them with clipboards and tired expressions, their voices a low murmur of procedure and protocol. One stopped to offer Grace a juice box. She took it, but didn't drink, just held it in her small hands like it might disappear if she looked away. "You're doing great," Michael said softly. He kept his voice low and steady, the same tone he'd used to calm frightened soldiers under fire. "Just a little longer." Grace nodded, but her fingers tightened around his. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Michael's muscles ached from sitting still, but he didn't move. He'd waited in worse places for better reasons. This little girl needed him to stay, so he stayed. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. A woman appeared in the doorway, carrying a worn leather briefcase and looking like she'd been pulled from sleep. She wore a simple gray cardigan over jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes swept the waiting area and landed on them. "Grace?" Her voice was gentle, but businesslike. The girl shrank back. The woman approached slowly, setting down her briefcase before kneeling to their level. "My name is Ms. Henderson. I'm here to help you, sweetheart." Grace turned her face into Michael's sleeve. "Ms. Henderson's gaze shifted to Michael, taking in his posture, his close-cropped hair, the way he sat like he was ready to move at a moment's notice. "You're the one who found her?" "Yes, ma'am. Captain Michael Walker. Thank you for staying with her." She pulled out a folder, flipping through papers. "I know this is difficult, but Grace needs to come with me tonight. We have a safe place for her, a good family who'll take care of her until we can sort this out." "No." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "I want to stay with him." Michael's chest tightened. He looked down at the small girl pressed against his side, at the fear in her eyes that he recognized too well. He'd seen it overseas in children who'd lost everything. It never got easier. "Sweetheart," Ms. Henderson said, her voice patient. "Captain Walker can't." "What happened to her mother?" Michael interrupted. The question came out harder than he intended. Ms. Henderson's expression shifted. She glanced at Grace, then back at Michael, weighing her words. "The officers found her mother a few blocks from the park. She'd overdosed. They got her to the hospital, but she's in critical condition. Michael felt Grace's small body go rigid beside him. Are there other relatives? Grandparents? Anyone? We're still looking into it, but so far… Ms. Henderson shook her head. There's no one listed. No emergency contacts. No family in the system. The words hung in the air like lead weights. Grace started to cry. Quiet, hitching sobs that shook her thin shoulders. She buried her face against Michael's arm, and he felt the wetness of her tears seeping through his sleeve. It's okay, he murmured, though he knew it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. It's okay. Ms. Henderson stood, her professional mask slipping just enough to show the exhaustion beneath. I'm sorry, but we need to go. The Foster family is waiting. Can I visit her? The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Missy Henderson. She studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp and assessing. That's unusual, but we can discuss it. She knelt again, this time focusing entirely on Grace. Sweetie, we really need to go now. I promise you'll be safe. Grace shook her head, clinging tighter. Michael's hand moved before he thought about it, reaching for the patch on his jacket, the Air Force emblem he'd worn through 12 years of service. He carefully unpinned it, the small piece of fabric and thread feeling heavier than it should. Grace, he said quietly, look at me. She lifted her tear-stained face. This patch belonged to me when I was a pilot. It went with me everywhere, through every mission, every hard day. He pressed it gently into her palm, closing her fingers around it. It means you're not alone anymore. You hold on to this, and you'll know someone's thinking about you. Grace stared at the patch, her thumb tracing the wings. I'll come see you soon, Michael said. I promise. You promise? I promise. Ms. Henderson helped Grace to her feet with practiced gentleness. The girl clutched the stuffed bear in one arm and Michael's patch in her other hand, her small frame seeming to shrink as she moved away. At the door, she turned back. Captain Michael? Yeah? Will you really come? His throat felt tight. I really will. They watched her go, Ms. Henderson's hand on her shoulder, until they disappeared down the hallway. Michael sat in the empty waiting room, listening to the buzz of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of voices. An officer approached with paperwork for him to sign. He did it mechanically, his mind elsewhere. By the time he made it home, the sky was starting to lighten at the edges. His house felt colder than it had before, emptier somehow, though nothing had changed. He made coffee more out of habit than desire, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot. When it was ready, he poured a mug and carried it to the kitchen table, the same table where his mother used to make him breakfast before school. The coffee sat untouched, steam rising into the still air. Michael bowed his head, his hands folded on the worn wood. It had been years since he'd prayed, really prayed, not just the desperate pleas whispered in firefights, or the hollow words recited at military funerals. But tonight, the words came. Lord, he whispered into the silence of his kitchen, if there's something I can do for her, show me. The dirt road stretched out like a ribbon of rust-colored earth, kicking up small clouds of dust behind Michael's truck. 2 days had passed since that night at the police station, 2 days of restless sleep and constant thoughts of a little girl clutching a worn, stuffed bear. Mrs. Henderson had answered on the third ring when he'd called that morning. There'd been surprise in her voice, maybe a touch of skepticism, but she'd given him the address. The Foster home appeared around a bend, a small yellow house with white shutters and a covered porch. Toys littered the front yard, a tricycle on its side, a sandbox missing half its sand, a faded plastic slide. A chain-link fence enclosed it all. More suggestion than barrier. Michael parked his truck and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. His heart hammered against his ribs in a way it hadn't since his first combat mission. This was different. This mattered in a way he couldn't quite name. He climbed out and walked to the gate. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman in her 50s stood there, flour dusting her apron, her round face creased with a lifetime of smiles. "You must be Captain Walker." "I'm Mrs. Patterson. Come on in." "Thank you, ma'am." The house smelled like cinnamon and something baking. Children's drawings covered the refrigerator with magnet letters spelling out names. A television played cartoons softly in the living room. "Grace!" Mrs. Patterson called. "You have a visitor, honey." Michael heard small footsteps, then silence. He turned to see Grace peeking around the door frame, half her body hidden, her fingers gripping the wood. She looked smaller than he remembered. Her hair had been brushed and pulled back with a pink clip. She wore clean clothes, a purple shirt with a butterfly on it, and jeans that were slightly too big. Michael knelt slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. He pointed to his jacket where the patch had been. "See?" he said softly. "Still missing. You keeping it safe for me?" Grace's hand moved to her pocket. She pulled out the Air Force patch, holding it up like proof of a promise kept. "I knew you'd take good care of it." That broke something loose. Grace ran across the room and threw her arms around his neck with such force he nearly toppled backward. He caught her, steadying them both, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would." Mrs. Patterson smiled from the doorway. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything. Grace, show Captain Walker your drawings." Grace took his hand and pulled him to the coffee table where papers were scattered like fallen leaves. She sat cross-legged on the floor, and Michael lowered himself beside her, his knees protesting the position. "This one's you," Grace said, holding up a drawing of a stick figure with wings. "You're a birdman because you fly planes." Michael studied the picture seriously. "That's the best drawing of me anyone's ever made." She beamed. They drew together, Grace narrating stories about each crayon mark: a house with a garden, a dog she wished she had, a rainbow that touched the ground. Michael added clouds to her sky and showed her how to draw an airplane, his hands guiding hers. "Can you tell me a story?" Grace asked, setting down her purple crayon. "About flying?" "Sure." Michael reached for one of the picture books stacked on the shelf. He found one with an airplane on the cover and settled into the couch. Grace climbed up beside him, tucking herself under his arm like she belonged there. He read slowly, doing different voices for the characters, pointing to the pictures when Grace asked questions. Her weight against his side felt both foreign and achingly familiar, like holding something precious he'd forgotten existed. When the story ended, Grace looked up at him with those big eyes. "Will you come back again?" "I will. I promise." "When?" "Soon. Maybe in a few days." She nodded, satisfied with that answer. Mrs. Patterson appeared with cookies on a plate. "Time to wash up for lunch, Grace." Grace hugged Michael one more time before running to the bathroom. Michael stood, brushing crayon shavings from his jeans. "She's a special little girl," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Hasn't smiled much since she got here. Until today. Thank you for taking care of her. It's what we do." She walked him to the door. "You're welcome any time, Captain." Outside, Michael headed for his truck. He was almost to the gate when he heard tapping on glass. He turned. Grace stood at the window, her palm pressed against the pane, the Air Force patch clutched tight in her other hand. She waved frantically, her whole body moving with the motion. Michael raised his hand and waved back. And then he smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and eased the tightness in his chest. The first genuine smile since coming home. The Saturday morning crowd filled Pop's diner with the comfortable noise of clinking plates and easy conversation. Michael slid into the corner booth where three men already sat, nursing coffee. Tom Reyes looked up first, his broad face splitting into a grin. "There he is. Thought you'd chickened out." "Just late." Michael shook hands around the table. Brian Carter, quiet as ever, offered a nod. Derek Miles smiled and pushed a menu toward him. "Already ordered you the breakfast special." Tom said. Figured you'd want the usual. They looked older than Michael remembered, harder around the edges in ways that had nothing to do with age. Brian's hands bore fresh grease stains despite the early hour. Derek had shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Tom's trademark humor couldn't quite hide the tension in his shoulders. So, Tom leaned back. You gonna tell us about this girl or keep us in suspense? Michael wrapped his hands around the coffee mug that appeared in front of him. The warmth seeped into his palms. Her name's Grace, 7 years old. Found her alone in the park Tuesday night. He told them everything. The thin blanket, the stuffed bear, the way she'd gripped his hand at the police station, the mother who'd overdosed, the foster home at the end of a dirt road. The table fell quiet. Brian was the first to speak, his voice low and measured. And you've been visiting her? Twice so far. Derek stirred sugar into his coffee, the spoon clinking against ceramic. What does she need? Everything. Michael paused. But mostly, she needs to know someone gives a damn. Tom drummed his fingers on the table. Well, we're good at giving a damn. What are we doing about it? I thought maybe... Michael hesitated. Maybe we could help. The foster home needs work. The porch is rotting through. And Grace, she needs people. Stability. I can fix a porch, Brian said simply. Got nothing better to do on weekends anyway. I'm in, Derek added. When do we start? Tom raised his coffee mug. Guess the squadron's got a new mission. The porch boards groaned under Brian's weight as he examined the damage. Whoever built this used cheap pine. No wonder it's falling apart. Michael held the measuring tape while Tom unloaded lumber from his truck. Grace watched from the window, her nose pressed against the glass. You can come out here, honey, Mrs. Patterson called from the doorway. Just stay clear of the tools. Grace appeared on the porch in seconds, her eyes wide as she took in the 4 men working. She recognized Michael immediately and ran to him, but stopped short when she saw the others. Grace, these are my friends, Michael said. That's Tom, Brian, and Derek. We all flew together. Tom squatted down to her level. You can call me Mr. Tom if you want. I brought you something. He pulled a small teddy bear from his jacket pocket. New, with a red ribbon around its neck. Thought your other bear might like a friend? Grace took it carefully, holding it like treasure. Thank you. And I've got crayons in the car, Derek added with a gentle smile. The big box, 64 colors. Her face lit up. Really? Really? But first, you gotta tell me your favorite color so I know which one to protect from Mr. Tom. He's a notorious crayon breaker. Am not? Tom protested, but he was grinning. Grace giggled, a sound like wind chimes. Brian worked quietly, measuring and cutting, but Michael noticed how his eyes softened when Grace brought him lemonade in a plastic cup. Thank you, Miss Grace. That's mighty kind. By afternoon, the porch stood solid and level. They'd painted it too, white, at Grace's request, and added a new railing. Grace sat between Michael and Derek on the steps, coloring, while Tom told exaggerated stories about their service days that made her laugh. And then, the captain here, Tom gestured dramatically, landed the helicopter in a sandstorm so thick you couldn't see your own hand. Saved 12 people that day. Grace looked up at Michael with awe. 12 whole people? Tom's story gets bigger every time he tells it, Michael said, but he smiled. Nope, 12, exactly. Tom winked at her. Your friend here's a genuine hero. The following Saturday, they met at the park. Tom brought a baseball and gloves. Derek packed sandwiches. Brian carried a kite he'd built from scratch, a rainbow-colored diamond that caught the light. Grace ran between them, her laughter echoing across the grass. She couldn't quite catch the ball, but Tom praised every attempt. Good eye, Grace. You almost had that one. When the kite lifted into the sky, Grace shrieked with delight, holding the string while Brian guided her hands. I'm flying it! Look, I'm flying it! Neighbors stopped to watch. Some smiled. A few waved. An elderly woman sitting on a bench called out, "Beautiful day for it." Michael felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of knots he'd carried for years. He glanced at his friends. Brian, usually so reserved, grinned as he adjusted the kite string. Derek was taking pictures on his phone, preserving the moment. Tom had Grace on his shoulders now, her hands in his hair as she pointed at clouds. They looked alive, purposeful, like soldiers with a mission worth fighting for. Evening painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. They spread a blanket near the pond, and Grace curled up between Michael and Derek, her new teddy bear tucked under her chin. Her eyes drifted closed as Tom's voice rumbled through another story. Michael watched her breathe, steady and peaceful. He looked at the men beside him, these brothers who'd answered his call without hesitation. "Maybe this is what home was supposed to feel like," he said quietly. The screen door of the foster home rattled before Michael could knock. Grace's face appeared in the window, her eyes bright and searching. When she spotted him, she let out a shriek that brought Mrs. Patterson hurrying from the kitchen. "Michael! Michael's here!" Grace yanked the door open and launched herself at him. He caught her easily, laughing as she wrapped her arms around his neck. "Hey there, kiddo. Miss me?" "Yes, 1,000,000 times yes." She pulled back to look at him, her hands on his shoulders. "Did you bring something? I see a box." "Maybe." He set her down and held up the small package he'd been carrying. "But it's something we have to build together." Her eyes went wide. "Together?" "That's right." "Think you're up for it?" She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the kitchen. "I can build anything." Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The smile on her face was warm and genuine. "She's been watching for you since breakfast. Coffee, Captain?" "That'd be great. Thank you." Grace climbed into a chair at the kitchen table and bounced with excitement. "Open it! Open it!" Michael sat beside her and carefully removed the wrapper. Inside was a model airplane kit, a simple propeller plane with large pieces designed for small hands. Grace leaned forward, her breath catching. "It's a plane," she whispered. "It is. And when we're done, it'll really fly. Not far, but it'll fly. Like you?" "Something like that." They spread the pieces across the table. Michael showed her how to identify each part, reading the numbers on the instruction sheet. Grace listened intently, her tongue poking out the corner of her mouth as she concentrated. "This piece goes here?" She held up a wing section. "Perfect. Now we need to put a little glue right along this edge. Not too much, just a thin line." Her hand shook slightly as she applied the glue, her face scrunched with effort. "Like this?" "Exactly like that. You're a natural." They worked in comfortable silence, broken only by Grace's questions and Michael's patient answers. Mrs. Patterson set coffee beside him and ruffled Grace's hair before returning to her dishes. "Why do planes fly?" Grace asked, pressing two pieces together while Michael held them steady. "Because of the shape of the wings. Air moves faster over the top than the bottom, and that lifts them up. Magic air?" He smiled. "Science air. But it feels like magic sometimes." She considered this, her small fingers careful as she reached for the next piece. "Did you fly a lot? In the Air Force?" "I did. That was my job, flying helicopters to help people who needed it." "Were you scared?" The question caught him off guard. He paused, meeting her honest gaze. "Sometimes, but I had my squadron with me. Mr. Tom, Brian, Derek, and other friends too. When you have people you trust beside you, being scared doesn't feel so bad." Grace nodded solemnly. "I was scared when Mama left, but then you came." His chest tightened. "I'm glad I found you, Grace." "Me too." She picked up the fuselage, examining it closely. "I want to fly someday, like the patch on your jacket, like you." "Yeah?" "Yeah. I want to go up in the clouds and see everything from way up high." "Mrs. Patterson says birds can see the whole world from up there." "Not the whole world," Michael said gently, "but a lot of it. And it's beautiful. Will you take me someday?" When I'm bigger? He didn't hesitate. I promise. The sound of footsteps made them both look up. Ms. Henderson stood in the doorway, her briefcase in hand and a folder tucked under her arm. She smiled at the scene before her. The half-built plane, the glue-sticky fingers, the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator. Captain Walker. Grace. She nodded to them both. Don't let me interrupt. I just need a word when you have a moment. Grace, keep working on the tail section, Michael said. Remember, thin line of glue. I remember. He followed Ms. Henderson into the living room. She set her briefcase down and pulled out a manila folder, but her expression was softer than usual. I wanted to update you on Grace's progress, she said. Her teachers report she's participating more in class. Fewer nightmares, according to Mrs. Patterson. She's eating better, smiling more. That's good to hear. It's more than good, Captain. It's remarkable. Ms. Henderson adjusted her glasses. The change coincides directly with your involvement. And your friends, the other veterans. She talks about you constantly. Michael shifted his weight. We're just spending time with her. That's all. That's everything. She handed him the folder. This is information about our Veterans Outreach Program. We pair former service members with foster children as official mentors. There's paperwork involved, background checks, training sessions, but if you're interested, I think you'd be an excellent candidate. For Grace specifically. He opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. This would make it official? I could keep seeing her even if… He trailed off, not wanting to finish the thought. Even if circumstances change, yes. It provides stability for both of you. Legal standing. Her voice softened. I've been doing this work for 20 years, Captain. I've seen a lot of temporary fixes and well-meaning gestures that fade. But what you're doing, what your squadron is doing, it's different. It's real. When can I start? I'll leave the paperwork with you. We can discuss details this week. The sun hung low when Michael finally stood to leave. The model plane sat complete on the table, its wings spread wide and proud. Grace clutched it carefully, already planning where to fly it tomorrow. At the door, she suddenly ran back to her room. Michael waited, exchanging a curious glance with Mrs. Patterson. Grace returned, holding a piece of paper, folded carefully. I made this. For you. He knelt down and unfolded it. The drawing showed 5 figures holding hands, 4 tall ones in green uniforms, and 1 small one with yellow hair in the middle. Above them, in wobbly crayon letters, she'd written 2 words. My family. Michael's vision blurred. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight while she giggled against his shoulder. Thank you, Grace, he whispered. I'll keep this forever. Promise? Promise. The clang of metal against concrete echoed through Michael's driveway as he slid out from beneath his old Ford pickup. Grease streaked his forearms, and the October sun felt warm on his face. He'd spent the morning replacing the truck's starter, the kind of simple, fixable problem that felt satisfying to solve. His phone buzzed on the toolbox. Ms. Henderson's name appeared on the screen. Ms. Henderson, he answered, wiping his hands on a rag. Everything okay? There was a pause. Too long. Captain Walker, do you have a moment to talk? His stomach tightened. Of course. I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Her voice carried a weight he'd never heard before. Professional distance stripped away, leaving only reluctance. The State Child Services Office made a decision this morning regarding Grace's placement. Michael straightened, his pulse quickening. What kind of decision? They're transferring her out of state, to a foster care system in Kentucky. They say it's due to capacity limits here, and they have an available placement there. She sighed. The decision is final unless someone has legal custody, which, as you know, I don't. The words tasted bitter. When? 2 weeks. The rag slipped from his hand. 2 weeks. 14 days. He stared at the oil stain spreading on his driveway and felt the ground shift beneath him. There has to be something we can do, he said. An appeal. Something. I've already tried. I pushed back as hard as I could, but the state has final authority. Unless you had legal standing as a guardian, or were in the process of formal adoption, there's no recourse. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm so sorry, Captain. I know what she means to you. Michael closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he saw Grace's face, her smile when she'd handed him that drawing, the way she'd whispered my family like it was the most precious secret in the world. Does she know yet? No. I wanted to tell you first. I thought you might want to be the one. I'll tell her. His voice came out rough. Tonight, Captain Walker. Thank you for calling, Ms. Henderson. He ended the call before she could say anything else, before the hollow ache in his chest could crack wide open. The foster home's porch light glowed yellow in the twilight. Michael sat in his truck for a full minute before forcing himself to walk to the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Mrs. Patterson answered his knock, took one look at his face, and her expression fell. Oh no. Is Grace here? In her room. I'll get her. Grace appeared moments later, the model airplane tucked under her arm. Her smile faltered when she saw him. Michael? What's wrong? Can we sit outside for a minute, just you and me? They settled on the porch steps. Grace set the plane carefully beside her and waited, her small hands folded in her lap. The cricket's song filled the silence. Grace, I need to tell you something, Michael began. His throat felt tight. Ms. Henderson called today. The people who make decisions about where kids live, they said you have to move to a different place in Kentucky. Her face went blank. Move? Yeah, kiddo. I'm sorry. But I like it here. I like Mrs. Patterson. I like school. I like... Her voice broke. I like you. I know. I like you too. So much. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Did I do something bad? Is that why? No. He turned to face her fully, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Grace, look at me. This is not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. The grown-ups made this decision, and it's a bad one. But it has nothing to do with you. Are you mad at me? Never. Not ever. She threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his shoulder. He held her, his own eyes burning as her small body shook against him. I don't want to go, she cried. Please don't make me go. I'm going to fix this, he said quietly. I promise you, Grace. I'm going to find a way to fix this. How? I don't know yet, but I will. She pulled back, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. You promise? For real? For real. By 9 o'clock, Michael's garage had become a war room. Tom arrived first, then Brian, then Derek. They stood around the workbench cluttered with old photographs of the squadron, empty coffee cups, and the paperwork Ms. Henderson had given Michael weeks ago. Kentucky. Tom shook his head. That's 3 hours away. Might as well be 3,000, Derek muttered. Michael leaned against the bench, arms crossed. There has to be something. Some legal option we haven't thought of. Adoption? Brian suggested. Takes months, maybe longer. And I'm single. No stable income yet. Fresh out of service. Michael's jaw tightened. They'll never approve it in time. Then we make them approve it. Tom's voice was firm. We show them you're not some unstable vet. You've got a support system, a community, brothers who'll vouch for you. It's not that simple. Maybe it should be. Tom stepped forward. You always told us a mission doesn't end until everyone's home. So let's bring her home. The others nodded. Derek picked up the paperwork, scanning it. What if we start here? The mentor program. Get you officially approved first. Then we build from there. And in the meantime, Brian added, we make noise, talk to local officials, get the community involved. Show them Grace belongs here. Michael looked at each of them. These men who'd flown through hell with him, who'd come home broken and searching for purpose. Now they stood ready to fight again. For a little girl none of them had known 2 months ago. All right, he said quietly. Let's get to work. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Riverside Gazette, casting long shadows across Carla Monroe's cluttered desk. She looked up from her computer as Michael entered with Tom, Brian, and Derek filing in behind him. "Captain Walker." She stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Carla was younger than Michael expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that studied him carefully. Her office smelled like old paper and coffee. "Thank you for meeting with us," Michael said. She gestured to the mismatched chairs around her desk. "Your call intrigued me. You mentioned a story about veterans and foster children?" Michael nodded. "Her name is Grace. She's 7 years old, and she's the reason we're here." For the next hour, they told Grace's story. Michael explained finding her in the park that cold night, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd gripped his hand. Tom described the squadron's first visit to the foster home, how Grace had called them her uncles. Brian talked about fixing the porch, teaching her to throw a baseball. Derek shared how mentoring Grace had given him a reason to get out of bed for the first time in months. Carla listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. When Michael mentioned the upcoming transfer, her hand paused. "They're sending her away? Even though she's thriving here?" "2 weeks from now," Michael said quietly. "Unless we can change their minds." "And how do you plan to do that?" Tom leaned forward. "By showing them what we're building. This started with Grace, but it's bigger now. We want to create a real mentorship program. Veterans helping foster kids, giving both groups something they desperately need: purpose and family." Carla set down her pen. "That's a beautiful idea. But you need support, resources, public backing." "That's why we're here," Michael said. She studied him for a long moment. "You know what I see when I look at you four? I see men who came home from war, searching for a mission worth fighting for. And you found one in the most unexpected place." She picked up her pen again. "Let me tell me more about Grace. What makes her smile? What does she dream about?" The article appeared in Thursday's edition, taking up the entire front page. Above the fold, a photo showed Grace at the park, laughing as Michael pushed her on a swing. The headline read, "Soldiers Without Missions Find One in a Little Girl Named Grace." Michael bought 10 copies at the drugstore. He read Carla's words over breakfast, his coffee growing cold. In a quiet Tennessee town, a 7-year-old girl named Grace is teaching hardened veterans what it means to fight for something that truly matters. After years of serving overseas, Captain Michael Walker returned home searching for purpose. He found it on a park bench, wrapped in a thin blanket, clutching a stuffed bear. The story captured everything: Grace's abandonment, the squadron's devotion, their vision for a mentorship program. But what struck Michael most was how Carla wrote about Grace herself, not as a victim, but as a little girl who loved drawing airplanes and asking questions about the stars. A child who deserved stability and love. By noon, Michael's phone rang constantly. Local business owners offering donations, a church group volunteering space for meetings, 3 different veterans calling to ask how they could help. The owner of Miller's Hardware stopped Michael outside the post office. "Read the article. My nephew served in Iraq. Came back struggling. Maybe this is what he needs. Can I give him your number?" "Please do," Michael said. Within days, the story spread beyond the Gazette. A regional TV station picked it up, sending a crew to interview Michael and the squadron. They filmed at the park where Grace was found, at the foster home, at the Veterans Center where the mentorship program was taking shape. The segment aired on the evening news. Grace appeared on camera for just 30 seconds, running across a field toward the squadron, her laughter bright and clear. But those 30 seconds changed everything. Donations poured in, enough to rent a proper meeting space, enough to provide supplies and activities for dozens of children. Veterans from across the state reached out, asking to join. Some were recent returnees like Michael. Others had been home for years, adrift and isolated. Grace's photo appeared on flyers in shop windows and community centers. Online posts shared her story thousands of times. A little girl named Grace. The hashtag read, "Veterans Finding Purpose." Michael watched it all with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The attention was helping, but would it be enough to keep Grace here? 3 weeks after the article published, the town held a ceremony in the square to officially launch the mentorship program. Folding chairs filled the grass. Local officials sat on a small stage. News cameras lined the back. Michael stood beside Tom, Brian, and Derek, wearing his dress uniform for the first time since coming home. His palms were sweating. The mayor spoke about service and community. Ms. Henderson announced that 12 foster children had already been matched with veteran mentors. Carla stood near the front, camera in hand, documenting everything. Then Grace appeared at the edge of the crowd, holding Mrs. Patterson's hand. She wore a blue dress Michael hadn't seen before, her hair pulled back with a ribbon. When she spotted him, her face lit up. She broke free and ran. Michael dropped to one knee as she crashed into him, her small arms wrapping tight around his neck. "Dad!" she cried, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad, you did it!" The word hit him like a physical blow. Dad. Not Michael, not Captain. Dad. His vision blurred. He held her close, unable to speak, unable to breathe. Around them, the crowd erupted in applause, but Michael barely heard it. All he knew was the weight of this little girl in his arms and the overwhelming surge of love that threatened to break him apart. "I'm so proud of you," Grace whispered against his shoulder. "My dad." A tear slipped down his cheek. Then another. Michael stood at the mailbox, sorting through the usual stack of bills and flyers. His fingers stopped on a thick manila envelope marked with the state seal. The return address read, Department of Child Services. His hands trembled as he walked back to the house. Inside, he set the other mail aside and stared at the envelope. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. He'd been expecting good news, maybe approval for his mentor application, or confirmation that the publicity had convinced the state to keep Grace local. He tore it open. The first line made his stomach drop. Notice of custody claim. His eyes scanned the legal language, trying to make sense of it. Biological grandmother, Martha Green, legal standing, guardianship petition approved. Grace had a grandmother, someone who wanted her, someone the law would choose over him. Michael sank into a chair, the letter shaking in his grip. 3 hours away. A woman named Martha Green. The document provided an address in a small town he'd never heard of. He read it again, searching for a mistake, searching for hope. There was none. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and old books. Michael sat across from Patricia Chen, a family law attorney Tom's wife had recommended. Mrs. Chen finished reading the notice and set it down gently. "I'm sorry, Captain Walker, but the law is clear. Biological relatives have priority in custody cases, especially grandparents. Even if Grace is happy where she is?" Michael's voice came out rough. "Even if she's finally feeling safe? The court's primary concern is family reunification when possible." Ms. Chen folded her hands. "This woman is Grace's grandmother. She has legal standing. You don't. I've been taking care of her for months. As a mentor, not a legal guardian." Her expression was kind but firm. "You never filed for foster certification or adoption proceedings. Without that, you have no parental rights." The words stung like a slap. "Can I contest it?" "On what grounds? You're not related to Grace. You haven't been her foster parent. That designation belongs to Mrs. Patterson. And you don't have any documented history as her caregiver beyond volunteer visits." Michael stared at his hands. They'd held Grace when she cried, built model airplanes with her, pushed her on swings, but legally, they meant nothing. "How long do I have?" "The grandmother is being given 2 weeks to prepare. Then Child Services will facilitate the transfer." Ms. Chen's voice softened. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but sometimes the law doesn't account for love. The foster home looked the same as always. Yellow paint, flower boxes, children's laughter drifting from the backyard. Mrs. Patterson met Michael at the door, her eyes red-rimmed. She knows something's wrong. She's been asking for you all day. Michael found Grace in the living room, sitting on the couch with her stuffed bear. When she saw him, she jumped up, but her smile faded when she looked at his face. What's wrong? She asked. He knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in his. Grace, I need to tell you something important. Her bottom lip trembled. Am I leaving? Yes, sweetheart, but not where you think. He swallowed hard. Your grandmother, your mom's mom, she wants you to come live with her. I don't know her. I know. I want to stay with you. Grace's voice rose, panicked. I want to stay with you and Uncle Tom and Uncle Brian and Uncle Dee. This is my home. Grace. No. She threw her arms around his neck, clinging tight. Please don't make me go. Please, Dad. I'll be good. I promise. I'll be so good. The word Dad shattered something inside him. Michael pulled her close, his throat burning. You are good. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. This isn't about you being good enough. Then why? How did he explain custody law to a 7-year-old? How did he make her understand that sometimes love wasn't enough? Your grandmother loves you, he said quietly. She's family, and the law says family comes first. But you're my family. Tears streamed down Grace's face. You're my dad. Michael's vision blurred. He held her tighter, feeling her small body shake with sobs. Around them, the foster home continued its normal rhythm. Other children playing, a TV murmuring in another room. But in this moment, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. You'll always be my little girl, he whispered against her hair. No matter where you are, no matter what happens, you're mine, and I'm yours. Distance doesn't change that. I don't want distance. I want you. He had no answer. He just held her while she cried, memorizing the weight of her in his arms, the smell of her strawberry shampoo, the sound of her voice saying, Dad. That night, the squadron gathered at Michael's house without being asked. They simply showed up. Tom first, then Brian, then Derek. No one called ahead. No one needed to. They sat in the living room in silence. Tom stared at the floor. Brian twisted a coffee mug in his hands. Derek leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The house felt unbearably still. No Grace running through the halls. No laughter. No crayon drawings being taped to the refrigerator. Just 4 men who'd found purpose and were watching it slip away. Michael sat in his father's old armchair, the custody notice on the table beside him. The lamp cast long shadows across the room. Nobody spoke. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows. Inside, silence pressed down like a weight none of them knew how to lift. The sky hung gray and heavy the next morning, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Michael stood outside the foster home, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. Beside him, Tom leaned against the porch railing. Brian paced the gravel driveway. Derek sat on the steps, head down. None of them spoke. Mrs. Patterson had already packed Grace's belongings, 2 small suitcases and a backpack with cartoon characters on it. They sat by the door like silent witnesses to another ending. A car appeared at the end of the road, an older sedan, blue paint faded by years of sun. Michael's chest tightened. The car pulled into the driveway and stopped. The engine cut off. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. She was in her late 60s, gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her clothes were simple, a cardigan over a floral dress, sensible shoes. Her face was lined with weariness, the kind that came from carrying too much grief for too long. This was Martha Green, Grace's grandmother. She glanced at the four men standing like sentries, then at the house. Her expression was unreadable. The front door opened. Mrs. Patterson came out first, one hand on Grace's shoulder. Grace looked small, so terribly. She wore her favorite purple sweater and clutched the stuffed bear tight against her chest. Her other hand gripped the Air Force patch Michael had given her that first night. Worn now, the edges frayed from being held so many times. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd cried herself out already. "Grace," Martha said softly, kneeling. "It's Grandma. Do you remember me?" Grace shook her head. "That's okay. We'll get to know each other." Martha's voice was gentle, though sadness colored every word. "I've missed you so much, sweetheart." Grace didn't move toward her. Instead, she looked at Michael. He nodded once, giving her permission to say goodbye. She walked to Tom first. The big man crouched down, his tough exterior crumbling as Grace wrapped her arms around his neck. "Bye, Uncle Tom," she whispered. "Take care of yourself, kiddo." His voice broke. "You're the bravest girl I know." She moved to Brian next, who knelt and pulled her into a fierce hug. "You keep drawing those pictures, okay? Send us some." "I will." Derek was last. He'd been the quietest of them all these months, but Grace had always crawled into his lap during movie nights. He picked her up now, holding her close. "You're gonna do great things," he murmured. "Remember that." Then she turned to Michael. He'd been holding himself together through sheer will. But when she walked toward him, her small face struggling to stay brave, something inside him cracked. He dropped to his knees. Grace rushed into his arms, and he wrapped them around her like he could shield her from the world. She buried her face against his shoulder. "Don't forget me," she whispered so quietly, only he could hear. "Never." The word came out strangled. "I could never forget you." "Promise?" "I promise." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, memorizing every detail. "You're my girl. You'll always be my girl. Even far away?" "Even far away." He touched the patch in her hand. "That's my promise. Every time you look at it, remember, you're not alone. You never will be." A tear slipped down her cheek. She nodded. Michael stood slowly, reluctantly releasing her. Grace walked back to where Martha waited. The grandmother looked at Michael, her eyes glistening. "Thank you," she said softly, "for taking care of her." "For loving her." He couldn't speak. He just nodded. "She talks about you in her letters," Martha continued. "About all of you. I can see why." She paused. "I'll make sure she's safe. I promise you that." "I know you will." Mrs. Patterson loaded the suitcases into the trunk. Martha helped Grace into the back seat, buckling her in with careful hands. Through the window, Grace pressed her palm against the glass. Michael raised his hand in return. The engine started. The car backed out of the driveway, turned, and began rolling down the road. Michael watched. They all watched. 4 grown men standing in a yard, watching a blue sedan carry away the little girl who'd given them purpose. Grace's face appeared in the rear window, looking back, getting smaller, fading. The car crested the hill and disappeared. Gone. Tom cleared his throat roughly. "I should head out." "Yeah," Brian said. "Me too." They left quietly, one by one, until only Michael remained. He stood there in the gray morning, staring at the empty road. Night fell cold and clear. Michael sat on his porch, the wooden chair creaking beneath him. Stars scattered across the black sky like scattered diamonds. He looked down at his jacket. The space where his patch used to be was just a faded outline now, a ghost of what had been there. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Inside the house, the silence waited. Michael closed his eyes and listened to the wind, feeling the emptiness echo through his heart like a hollow drum. 3 weeks passed like water through Michael's fingers, slow and empty, each day bleeding into the next. He moved through the motions, made coffee, fixed things around the house that didn't need fixing, walked to the park and back. The squadron called less often now. Everyone was trying to move forward, though none of them quite knew how. The house felt bigger than before, quieter. Michael sat at his kitchen table on a Thursday morning, sorting through a small stack of mail. Bills mostly, a flyer for the hardware store, a catalog he'd never ordered. Then he saw it. An envelope, cream-colored and slightly wrinkled, addressed in handwriting that wobbled across the front. The letters were big and uneven, clearly written by a child. His breath caught. The return address said Martha Green, followed by a town he'd never heard of. Michael's hands trembled as he picked it up. He stared at it for a long moment, almost afraid to open it. Finally, he slid his thumb under the flap and tore it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, lined notebook paper with holes punched on the side. And beneath it, another sheet. This one covered in crayon. He unfolded the letter first. The handwriting was Grace's. He recognized it from the drawing she'd made him months ago. Dear Daddy Michael, Grandma says I can write to you. I hope you get this. I miss you and Uncle Tom and Uncle Brian and Uncle Dee. I miss the park and Mrs. Patterson's cookies. Grandma is nice. She makes me pancakes and lets me have a nightlight. I go to school now. I'm in 2nd grade. My teacher's name is Mrs. Lopez, and she says I'm good at reading. I tell Grandma about you, about the soldiers who became my uncles. She smiles when I talk about you. She says you must be special people. I'm not scared at night anymore. I remember what you said. I'm not alone. I look at the patch every day. Love, your Grace. Michael's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, hot and silent, sliding down his cheeks and dropping onto the table. He read the letter again. Then, a third time. Your Grace. Those 2 words broke something open inside him. Not grief this time. Something else. Something that felt like light pushing through clouds. He set the letter down carefully and picked up the second sheet. It was a drawing. Crayon on white paper, colors bright and cheerful. Grace had drawn a house, yellow with a red roof, flowers in the front yard, a tree beside it. And standing in front of the house were 2 figures, a tall woman with gray hair and a small girl holding a stuffed bear. In the corner, she'd drawn something else. 4 stick figures in green uniforms standing in a row. Above them, written in purple crayon, My Soldiers. Across the bottom, in careful letters, Love, your Grace. Michael pressed his palm against his mouth, shoulders shaking. He wept quietly at his kitchen table, alone but not empty. Pride swelled in his chest. Pride for this brave little girl who'd been abandoned and afraid, who now went to school and made friends and wasn't scared anymore. She was okay. She was going to be okay. And maybe, just maybe, so was he. That afternoon, Michael drove to Tom's auto shop. His friend was under a truck when he arrived, boots sticking out from beneath the chassis. Tom rolled out on the creeper, grease smeared across his forehead. Michael? What's up? Michael held out the letter. Tom wiped his hands on a rag and took it. He read slowly, lips moving slightly. When he finished, he looked up with wet eyes. She's doing good. Yeah. Michael's voice was thick. She is. Tom handed the letter back carefully, like it was made of glass. We did that. We helped her get there. We did. They called Brian and Derek. An hour later, all 4 men sat around Tom's workbench, passing the letter between them. The drawing lay in the center, Grace's bright crayon soldiers watching over them. I've been thinking, Michael said quietly, about what we started, the mentorship program. Yeah? Brian leaned forward. We changed her life. What if we could do that for more kids? Michael looked at each of them. There are foster kids all over the state, veterans struggling to find purpose. What if we brought them together? Derek nodded slowly. A camp, maybe. where vets and kids can just be together, talk, heal. Exactly. Michael felt energy returning to his voice, the first real spark in weeks. We have the connections now, the media coverage. People want to help. They've been asking how. Tom straightened. We'd need a location, supplies, volunteers. We can get those, Michael said. We got Grace's story out there. We can do it again. Make it bigger. Brian grinned. Mission expansion. Mission expansion, Michael repeated. They spent the next 2 hours planning. Names for the program. Possible locations for a summer camp. Veterans they could recruit. Organizations to contact. The workbench filled with scribbled notes and half-formed ideas. But beneath it all was something solid. Purpose. Renewed and multiplied. Grace had been one little girl. Now they could reach dozens, maybe hundreds. Evenings settled over the town, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Michael drove to the park and parked in the empty lot. He walked the familiar path to the bench by the pond, the same bench where he'd found her, small and scared and alone. Now it was just a bench again, empty, peaceful. Michael sat down, looking out over the water. The first stars appeared overhead, faint pinpricks of light against the deepening blue. He thought about Grace in her yellow house with the red roof, safe, going to school, not afraid anymore. He thought about the men who'd become brothers again through loving one lost child. He thought about all the children still waiting, still scared, still hoping someone would find them. A breeze rustled the trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Michael looked up at the stars and smiled. "Thank you for saving us, kiddo," he whispered. 6 months transformed everything. The field behind the Veterans Center stretched wide and green under the spring sun, dotted with canvas tents and colorful banners. Children's laughter rang through the air, mixing with the voices of volunteers calling instructions and greeting newcomers. Michael stood beside a half-erected tent, wiping sweat from his forehead. His hands worked the ropes with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from 1,000 field exercises. But this time, his chest wasn't tight with anxiety. His shoulders didn't carry the weight of impossible missions. This time, he smiled. "Walker, need a hand?" Tom jogged over, carrying a cooler full of water bottles. "I got it." Michael secured the final stake and stepped back. "That's number 12. How many more?" "Just 3. Tom set down the cooler and stretched. "We're ahead of schedule. Kids start arriving in an hour." Around them, the camp hummed with activity. Brian directed a group of teenagers setting up the mess tent. Derek organized first aid supplies with 2 nurses who'd volunteered. Parents walked the grounds with younger children, pointing at the archery range and craft station. 43 kids registered, 18 veterans volunteering. A weekend of connection, healing, and hope. Michael looked across the field and felt something unfamiliar. Lightness, like someone had taken the stones from his pockets and let him breathe. "Hey," Tom touched his shoulder. "You good?" "Yeah." Michael's voice came out rough. "I'm really good." The opening ceremony began at noon. Children and veterans gathered in a circle near the main pavilion. Michael stood at the center, microphone in hand, heart pounding but steady. "Thank you all for coming," he began. The crowd quieted. 6 months ago, I was a guy who came home from war, not knowing what home meant anymore. But then, a car engine interrupted him. Everyone turned toward the access road. A silver sedan rolled slowly into the field, tires crunching over gravel. Michael's breath stopped. The car parked at the edge of the lot. The driver's door opened first. A woman in her late 60s with silver hair stepped out, shielding her eyes from the sun. Then the passenger door flew open. Grace tumbled out, pigtails bouncing, wearing a yellow dress and sneakers that lit up when she ran. She saw him. Her entire face lit up like sunrise. "Daddy Michael!" Her voice carried across the field, high and joyful and absolutely fearless. She dropped the small backpack she'd been holding and bolted toward him, arms pumping, feet flashing bright with every step. Michael didn't think. He ran. His boots pounded the grass as he closed the distance. The microphone fell from his hand, forgotten. The crowd disappeared. The whole world narrowed to one small girl racing toward him with her arms wide open. He dropped to his knees just as she reached him. Grace slammed into his chest with the force of a cannonball. Her arms wrapped around his neck, squeezing tight, and he lifted her up, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. "You're here," he choked out. "You're really here. I told Grandma." Grace pulled back just enough to cup his face in her small hands. "I told her about the camp, and she said we could come, and I get to stay the whole weekend and—" Behind them, the squadron erupted in cheers. Tom whooped. Brian clapped. Derek wiped his eyes, grinning. Michael stood, Grace still wrapped around him like a koala. His vision blurred, but he didn't care. He laughed through the tears, pressing his forehead against hers. "I missed you so much, kiddo. I missed you more." The grandmother approached slowly, a soft smile on her weathered face. She stopped a few feet away, hands folded. "Captain Walker." Michael shifted Grace to one hip and extended his free hand. "Mrs. Green, thank you for bringing her." She shook his hand firmly. "Call me Martha." Her eyes were kind but assessing. "Grace hasn't stopped talking about this camp since she heard about it. About you and your men. We—" Michael's throat tightened. "We love her very much." Martha's expression softened further. "I can see that." She glanced around at the tents, the children, the veterans standing with quiet pride. "I've followed the news coverage, seen what you've built here, what you're doing for these kids." She turned back to him. "I was worried, at first. Worried about strangers taking my granddaughter's heart. But love isn't something you ration. And Grace is happier when she talks about all of you." She paused. "So I'm asking, would you and your squadron stay part of her life? Not just this weekend? For good." Michael couldn't speak. Grace squeezed his neck tighter. Tom stepped forward, voice thick. "Ma'am, that would be an honor." Martha nodded. "Then we're family." The sun dipped low as evening painted the sky gold and pink. The camp had emptied to the park nearby, the same park where Michael had found Grace on that cold autumn night. Now it blazed with life. Children threw frisbees and chased each other across the grass. Veterans sat on blankets, talking quietly with foster parents. Grace played catch with Derek, her laughter ringing clear every time she caught the ball. Michael stood beside the bench by the pond. A small crowd gathered as the mayor pulled a cloth from a bronze plaque mounted on the bench's backrest. The inscription gleamed, dedicated to Grace, the little girl who brought a squadron back home. The crowd applauded. Grace ran over, tugging Michael's hand to see. "That's me!" She traced the letters with one finger. "That's you," Michael whispered. She looked up at him, eyes bright. "Are you happy, Daddy Michael?" He knelt beside the bench, resting one hand on the cool bronze. Around him, his squadron stood close. Veterans and children filled the park with sound and warmth and second chances. Michael looked at Grace, safe, loved, brave, and felt the last piece of himself click into place. "Yeah, kiddo," his voice broke. "Mission complete. I hope you enjoyed that story. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you do not miss out on tomorrow's story. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy.